I rode the 3 Tigers here in Florida and found the one that could be considered a Goldilocks sports tourer. But before I show you which one hits that sweet spot, I need to come clean about my personal bias. Despite decades of touring experience, sport bikes continue to be my first love. But ever since my 40th birthday, comfort and value for money are increasingly becoming more important than I'd like to admit. So the price jump between the Tiger Sport 660, the 800 and a Tiger 900 GT had me thinking, did Triumph actually do their math right? But when I looked at them closely, I realized that the difference between the 800 and 900 are marginal conveniences, but the 660 to 800 jump is a lot more fundamental. Let me show you the performance we get for the money. Tiger Sport 800 hands down has the best motor of the 3. It's smoother than the Tiger Sport 660 with noticeably higher power and torque available on tap whether you're in low, mid or high revs. The 660 does have an engaging mid-range, but the low end is, well, unremarkable. That's something I noticed when comparing it with 650cc tourers for another video. It's smoother than the twins, but nowhere close to the 800 triple. The 900 GT Pro was actually my favorite Tiger until I rode the 800. Despite slightly lower power figure on paper, it didn't actually feel any slower to me. The T-Plane Triple delivers power and torque everywhere that kept me excited all day long. I personally did not mind the vibrations, but the engine heat was quite obvious in Florida weather. Triumph claims to have resolved those issues in 2024, but I'll show you what the owners had to say about that when we get to the reliability section of the video. Having said that, what's really interesting is how the transmission gets progressively smoother and slicker as you go from the 660 to the 800 and then to the 900 GT. I actually rode the GT Pro version with the standard quick shifter and electronic preload adjuster. The step up in braking performance is even more remarkable when you go from the axial Nissans to the radial Jaguars, but nothing comes close to the bite and feel of the full Brembo braking system on the 900 GT. But do we all need Brembo radial master cylinder and those shiny Stylema calipers? Well, for most reasonable sport touring enthusiasts, it's honestly an overkill. But for those of us secretly planning to take our Tigers to a track day and embarrass some sport bikes, well, that would be much higher on my list of upgrades than, say, an aftermarket exhaust. Because the stock exhaust notes are already pure music to my ears. Take a listen. Now, I love the 800 triple sound more than the others, but what about handling and comfort? The 660's suspension is damped like a street bike, not uncomfortable, but not plush like a proper tourer either. Around town, it's a breeze. Highway handling is confident, but you feel road imperfections more than the others. The 800 also has Showa suspension, but with more adjustability and noticeably better damping compared to the 660. It feels more versatile for sporty riding while staying reasonably comfortable over rough surfaces. But the 900 GT Pro's Marzocchi suspension made me realize something really interesting about this three-way comparison. You see, the 660 and the 800 are touring versions of their street bikes and retain that sporty DNA. However, the 900 GT is a road bias adaptation of Triumph's traditional Tigers, which have always been mile-munching iconic adventure bikes. No wonder the 900 GT was the most comfortable of the three when it came to ride quality. But the beauty of that suspension is that when I compared it with the 900 Tourers, I found myself complimenting it for how easily it tipped into turns despite its ADV origins and a 19-inch front wheel. But relative to the Tiger Sports models with their 17-inch wheels and sportier geometry, it's not as quick or flickable. And by sportier geometry, I don't mean they're aggressive, just more confidence inspiring when diving into turns, especially for sport bike lovers. The seat comfort is reasonable for 100 to 150 miles, but if I could draw upon my touring experience, for long distance riding, none of the stock seats are ever gonna work for all types of riders. It's a lot like the stock windshield's ability to protect you from the wind blast and buffeting. No matter what I or your favorite reviewer tells you, it's going to feel different to different riders depending on your preferences and body proportions. I'm 5'8" with a 29-inch inseam, and the 800 and 900 windshields work fairly well, but I couldn't flat foot any of them. Thankfully, none of them felt top heavy enough to concern me, but then it may be the years of tiptoeing making me act all cocky. By the way, I couldn't get my better half to come with me on the test rides, so I couldn't tell you about passenger comfort, but I will say that I don't like the raised passenger seat on the 660 and 800 that put the pillion on the second floor. I would much rather have a flatter seat like the 900 GT. However, looking at the bigger picture, even though the 800 owns performance, 900 nails comfort, and the 660 wins on price, for a truly Goldilocks balance, we need to consider three more factors: standard frills, running cost, and the upgrades it will take to make it truly yours. This year, all three bikes have lean-sensitive ABS and traction control, but in an attempt to differentiate between the 900 GT and GT Pro, they've ended up with lower models having quick shifters that the 900 GT base trim is missing. What gets more media attention though is the cruise control. The 660 and 800 get a more basic version that can lock the current speed, while the 900 GT has buttons to adjust cruising speeds like you do in a car. But honestly, Triumph deserves props for even offering cruise control in that segment, because currently no other manufacturer does that. In fact, next week I'll show you how the Tiger Sport 800 compares with other 800cc touring machines in just as much detail. Subscribe to watch that comparison video. But that is not to say that they got everything right. Everyone's complaining about the 660's basic dash making its way to the 800, especially when most bikes in this class have full TFT displays that rival the 900 GTs. But here's what I'm curious about. Would a mediocre dash really be a deal breaker to you? While you share your opinion in the comments, I want to point out a bigger tragedy with all three Tigers that rarely gets talked about in the reviews. The owners would promptly tell you that Triumph's My Connectivity app that's promoted as a standard feature on all three bikes doesn't work all that great. Most people just give up on the native navigation app altogether and start using their phones instead. But here's a bigger problem. After my iPhone's face recognition camera stopped working, I realized that even those phone mounts with vibration dampers don't exactly work as promised. So I tested this Aochi C6 Pro screen that not only lets you mirror your phone's Google Maps wirelessly, but also has TPMS and 2 dash cams. But when I realized that it's cheaper than the most popular phone mount bundles, I got really curious about its quality and reliability. The credibility that took years to build is obviously more important to me, so here's my unbiased review despite AOT's discount code and a commission offer. The positives: the installation is fairly easy, 4 well-marked cables with easy connectors for the 2 dash cams, a controller, and power source. They give you all the tools, extension cords, and even a USB power cord. Connecting the phone via Bluetooth is pretty intuitive, and the navigation works perfectly. Instead of the controller, I preferred using the touchscreen to switch from the map to a phone call, dash cameras, and even music. It's basically an Apple CarPlay or Android Auto interface. The TPMS is easy to view and lets you set up warnings for high or low tire pressure. It also shows you your speed with the built-in GPS. However, some reviewers complained about the touchscreen responsiveness. It's not as good as a $1,000 iPhone, but pretty decent for the price. It worked even with my race gloves on. Having said that, there are 2 criticisms that I have. Number 1, the setup guide is just too basic. While it's not technically difficult, opening the box to a bunch of cords and parts feels a little overwhelming at first glance. The second challenge is that they tell you not to connect directly to the battery since there's no on-off switch. Instead, use an accessory outlet. However, most motorcycles don't have spare accessory outlets, and wiring it to lights or other accessories is not something most riders want to tackle. For this demo, I went straight to the battery, but for long-term use and testing, I'll need to buy a smart switch or power distribution module at extra cost, but the general build quality is pretty decent for a little over $200. If your bike has a USB outlet, you can totally ignore my complaints. By the way, neither of the first two Tigers get a USB charging port, but thankfully all of them get an adjustable windshield, which is actually pretty easy to adjust. The one on the 800 is a little less intuitive, but at least there is a chance that at some setting, a few lucky ones might get the same results as Triumph's test riders. For the rest of us, an aftermarket windshield would be on top of a whole list of upgrades, some of which I will link in the description to give you some ideas. Sintered brake pads are something I would definitely consider, but a Brembo radial master cylinder could be a not so cheap thrill for those of us who would actually take it to a track day for shits and giggles. But a more practical upgrade would be a comfort seat. The OEM comfort seat upgrades do have pretty good reviews. However, for luggage options, I would hunt for deals and look at aftermarket before I settle for Triumph's catalog. But what about running costs? Well, before we get there, it took about 60 hours to produce this video to help you with your due diligence. If you find this helpful, please share this in all of your motorcycle groups to save my tiny channel from drowning out in the flood of AI-generated videos. And speaking of savings, Triumph's fuel economy claims seem fairly reasonable, but they would vary by riding styles and conditions. So I would recommend a fuel stop around the 200-mile mark to save yourself from a walk of shame to a gas station. On their part, Triumph has managed to make these engines work with regular fuel despite the high compression ratios, which is great for touring to remote locations where premium fuel is not easy to come by. What I really appreciate is that Triumph's attempts at reducing running costs go even further. Even the service frequency is pretty low, whether it's oil changes or valve adjustments. As much as I'm aware that Triumph service is typically more expensive than Japanese bikes in most regions, I reckon a lower frequency could offset that difference to some degree. But what about reliability, especially given the 2 years unlimited miles warranty? The Tiger Sport 800 is brand new, and so far the impressions I found in ownership forums are quite positive outside of the few things I pointed out during the review. But the 900's heating and vibration issues still seem to be present in newer models despite Triumph's claims of having fixed them. The weird key location that makes mounting a tank bag a little awkward is also a common nitpick I found in the forums. There were reports of oil leaks in the pre-2024 models as well, but they seem far and few. What's remarkable is that the 660 has been around for about 4 years now, and most owners have nothing but praises. Of course, there may be some outliers, and I will link the forums in the description to help you with your own due diligence. But if you want a single motorcycle in your garage that is just as perfect for commuting and canyon carving as it is for touring with or without a passenger and delivers the best value for your money, I feel like one of the three Triumphs stands a pretty good chance of being close to perfect. The Tiger Sport 60 is actually a pretty good bike for new as well as returning riders. It's actually the strongest among the 650s unless you're in Australia and stuck with the LAMS restrictions, but reliability and happy customer stories are abundant, and cruise control is godsend at this price point. The power is not necessarily insufficient for riding with a pillion, but the difference in handling and eagerness will be noticeable between solo and two-up riding. Brakes aren't great and suspension isn't adjustable, but for the money I couldn't call that a massive deal breaker. The 900 GT is on the other end of the price spectrum, and yet for the premium brakes and suspension, noticeably more comfortable ride quality, it does offer great value for money if you can afford it. But please know that the heating and vibrations aren't fully gone, and some owners still complain about the awkward key location and the slow loading TFT display. For my riding style and preferences, the Tiger Sport 800 has indeed hit the bullseye. Exciting performance without a rowdy character. The suspension is a little more comfort biased than the 660, but I would get a comfort seat and a taller windshield to make it a truly Goldilocks tourer. Some owners have complained about mid-range vibrations, but I didn't find myself bothered about that. However, I am looking forward to comparing it with a few more rivals to see how it stacks up against other manufacturers. Please subscribe to watch those videos in the upcoming weeks. In the meantime, you can watch this 900cc Tourers comparison or this one to compare the Tiger Sport 660 with rivals from other manufacturers. No matter what you pick, just remember, finding the perfect bike is a lot more about knowing who you are as a rider than poring over spec sheets. This is Faraz, helping you find your own right answers, one video at a time.